The learning areas are, in effect, the substance of learning. Learning for knowledge, learning for skills. Fundamental to a good education, knowledge and skills. The issue, of course, is what knowledge, which skills? Well, we've got choices available to us. One thing's for sure, we can't cover all the knowledge that's out there. So we need to be focusing on knowledge that is going to have good applicability for our students in the world in which they live and in their progress through an education and a schooling system. The national curriculum provides a series of what are called essence statements for each curriculum area. Now, an essence statement is just that. It's the essence of the learning area. What's it all about in a nutshell? This is probably the starting point for developing our own pedagogical competency in terms of the curriculum areas. Can, for example, you give me a very succinct, short statement of what science education is about, or the arts education? I've asked many teachers to do this. Then I read out to them without referring initially to documentation. I say, just tell me, what do you think science education is about? And then when I read the statements from the national curriculum and say, well, how consistent was your view compared to what's in the document? Not too many hands go up when I read some of the statements that are in the document. Then I refer back to the draft one and say, well, how do those ones fit? And then they say, yeah, they're much closer. You see, there are all these processes that have gone on in curriculum development, and sometimes we get more and more distant from where general practitioner teachers are actually at. Primary teachers are general practitioners. It's unreasonable to expect them to have the depth of subject knowledge that you'd expect from a secondary specialist teacher. However, I think it is still reasonable to expect that even a general practitioner teacher would be able to say, well, science education is this. Just as we expect from a medical practitioner for them to be able to say to us, well, the swine flu is this, without having to go and look it up in a book before he could tell you what it is. We should have this knowledge that we can carry around with us. Now, that takes time to develop that. We've lost that capacity because we've been following a small picture view of curriculum areas for the last 10 years. Rather than teachers being helped to develop a big picture view of what the arts is about, we go straight to the achievement objectives. A fragmentation of that kind does a disservice to the development of the professional mind in terms of their knowledge of curriculum areas. Now, each learning area is separated into strands, and those strands are very typical of curricula internationally. But we've got about 27 strands all up. And if I asked you if you could actually fill in the blank boxes and say what the name of each strand is, you might struggle initially. But this again is another entry level of having an overview of what our curriculum is all about. I remember asking a principals conference once at an open plenary session, how many of you could tell the person next to you what the strands are for social sciences? Now, many of them struggled. So we'd have to argue that we've got a low level of general curriculum literacy if we can't actually have that sort of stuff in our heads. Now, you can't do all of this in short time. It takes time to develop that capacity and strength of thought and mind that in turn is a great investment in our curriculum practice. The main thing is to actually commit yourself, albeit in a longer range view, to developing that capacity. It says in the guidance that's provided in the national curriculum that you are obligated to address all of the strands in your programs. Now we have to be careful here that we don't do it in a sort of a cover things lightly, over the surface, tokenistic way. I mean, to say, okay, we've done the living world strand, we did the life cycle of the butterfly in term 3, that sort of approach is not necessarily going to take you into the meaning of what that strand is really all about. It's the learning area statements that provide the big picture view and the source for the big picture goals that a school should be articulating in its curriculum. That's where we start when we look at the learning areas, is with the big picture learning area statements. I've worked with a number of schools on helping them to develop their big picture goals, cross-school goals for each of the learning areas. It takes time. I'm satisfied if in one session, which might be half a day, that we've really come to grips with one learning area. Now that in itself tells you that we're on a journey, and that journey is going to take time if we want to get deeply embedded, meaningful practice at work in our schools. This is represented by the metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle. Now the jigsaw, you can only see the big picture when you've got the pieces together. If you've got too many pieces to have to put together, it's going to take time, and often we're going to resort to just looking at one little picture at a time, one little section. So at a school-wide level, we need to say, okay, in science, for example, or written English, for example, or visual art, for example, what are the 3 or 4 major goals that we want to focus on for kids learning, and those goals can apply across the school. In turn, teachers will draw upon achievement objectives relative to their needs of the students and the needs of the students and their circumstances. Make decisions about which ones might fit within one of those bigger picture goals. But at the end of the day, the school is not so much interested in the little picture achievement objectives as what it is in the achievement of the bigger picture goals. Goals that we hope everybody in the school is actually developing some familiarity with. Take, for example, in science. In this particular school here, New Time School, as one of their big pictures for science, they've chosen the strands. And the strands don't work for all learning areas, but for science they do for this school. They've said in the living world, the goal is that students will recognise that all groups of living things have life processes, common and unique requirements, and adapt to and interact with their environment in particular ways. Now, when we operate at that level of thinking, when we establish that as a goal, it opens up all sorts of possibilities as to how a teacher might provide rich learning experiences for students. To just do the life cycle of a butterfly on its own is to perhaps artificially select out a very small aspect of what this particular goal is all about. It's about seeing interrelationships across. The achievement objectives in this revised curriculum look very nice the way they're on pull-out statements and coloured and all that sort of thing. And many teachers seem to think, well, wait, on these curriculums, there are many fewer achievement objectives than in the previous document. Well, I've done the analysis, I've counted them on a plane ride from Dunedin to Auckland, and empirically there's about the same number of achievement objectives in the revised curriculum as what there were in the previous documents. Now think about that. The difference now is that these are not the drivers of school curriculum goals or the school curriculum itself. We've provided some examples of analyses of the achievement objectives, and when you examine those you'll see that there's a device that's been at work here, and that device I've called semantic incrementalism. We keep on tacking in more words, whereas the whole original intention of the achievement objectives was to allow teachers to make a pretty clear distinction between learning at one level as opposed to learning at another level. Well, internationally it's been shown that systems struggle to make those sort of definitions of distinction, and we, again, in this revised curriculum, have not really proven that we've been able to actually crack the nut on that particular one. So again, we have this argument for having a big picture view. If you look at, for example, the achievement objectives for Objective 2, regular physical activity, and if you run your eye from level 1 to level 4 and beyond, you could say, well, these have all got a very similar message. Now we could draw from these one big picture view of what we're trying to do. And that big picture view can prevail for all of our students, regardless whether year 1 or year 13 or year 8 or year 3. The goal being students regularly participate in highly active and enjoyable physical activities and know the benefits for personal well-being. I think we want that for every level. Of course, what will happen is that the learning experiences for each level will be developed in ways that are appropriate to the developmental stages of students. So we've got a lot of things to think about in designing our school's curriculum, but perhaps the first point to remember is a big picture focus. Drawing that focus from the learning area statements, the achievement objectives function is to provide some leads as to sorts of learning experiences we might cover within those big picture focused goals for our school.